Oh my goodness. Okay.
Cameras rolling, audio rolling.
I feel.
Are we with it?
No, I personally feel like 2025. Wheels have come off.
Right. Yes.
I don't know what's happening. Yeah. Oh my goodness. Well, I think it's just. I mean, I just have to take a pause and just I think give us credit for pulling all this all together with the shoestring ability, but also like running around, turning everything on.
Yes.
I feel it's a little. I feel a little disheveled. I'll be honest.
Right.
But
we're there. We've got our personal phones set up as cameras. We've got everything else going.
We got it. Yeah. And so, the last episode we just aired, I think I lost count of how many times in that episode I pleaded for 2025 to slow down.
It's just speeded up.
And
yes.
it was like a hold my beer moment where it was like challenge accepted and hit the gas pedal.
So we should say we're recording this in inauguration week.
Yes.
And it's only Thursday. The inauguration was on Monday, and already everything has sort of
changed.
Gone haywire.
Yeah, I have a tab here opened up, and I'm basically, because I'm like, while we're talking, something might change.
Right.
That's entirely possible. And yeah, it's like, yeah, it's just insane the amount of things that, and granted, anytime there's a changeover in the White House, there's going to be all kind of flurry of changes, right? And I think it's important to say too, like, I don't think the goal here is to be political at all.
No, we're not.
You know, things might seep in here or there, but of course we're human, right?
Right.
You know, but yeah, I mean, right now we're at technically the third week of January or something. If this is a sample of what 2025 is going to be like, we need to buckle up. I'm already exhausted. I think I need a nap.
So actually, I could just imagine. Remember those big pause letters around AI? This was 2-3 years ago now. Everybody's signing up saying, let's have a pause on AI. I think we ought to have a letter that says, let's have a pause on 2025.
Just let's have a pause. Like everyone just pause. We don't need to, let's just soak this. I think there's been enough already. Yeah. We can easily get through by March with just what's happened already. I mean, it's just insane. And yeah, like this is just crazy. So, already. So I remember, again, the podcast episode that would have just aired, we were talking also about the rise of synthetic users, all this stuff. Yeah. Now it just feels like that's so old and so outdated.
We've got Stargate now.
We've got Stargate. We shouldn't beat around the bush too bad, I guess. I mean, on the heels, right, of it was the first full day in office, so it must have been Tuesday, right? Yes. So Tuesday, the 21st?
I've lost.
Yeah, I think it was the 21st. Yes. They announced Stargate.
Yes. This big $500 billion AI initiative.
It is insane. And I am calling it Stargate AG-I. Because
so we may want to leave this till after the cold open, but I was dying to ask you about the name.
Let's tease it and then we'll take a quick break for our thing. But I'm like, who is naming these things? Because, well, one, if you look at who was up there, that's a bunch of nerds, yes. Right? I mean, they're in some way, they're in good company. But I'm like, who names this thing Stargate? Right. Because if you're not familiar, there was both a film and a TV series called Stargate. But yeah, absolutely insane. So yeah, on January 21st, a newly inaugurated President Donald Trump was accompanied by OpenAI's CEO, Sam Altman, who we've talked about many times, Oracle's now CTO, Larry Ellison, and SoftBank CEO, Masayoshi Son, to announce this massive AI infrastructure project called Stargate. So there's a lot here, a lot on the heels. And also just, again, talking about this, last time we were talking about this balance of innovation and risk with advanced technologies such as AGI and this rush and all kinds of stuff. But, by extension now we have this worldwide AI arms race. I mean, it's just insane. So let's take a beat and we'll come right back and let's talk about Stargate, the name.
Sounds good.
Initializing waveform.
Modulating signals for transmission.
exploring the possible, probable, and preferable futures.
Welcome to Modem Futura. All right. I think breaks, I don't even know if they restore the energy enough yet.
I know. So I have been searching the web for anything that gives me any intelligence on why they called it Stargate. And I think this goes back to the original discussions and agreement between OpenAI and Microsoft, where they had this initial project called Stargate. But the obvious thing, if you've watched Stargate, the series or the movie, this idea of a portal that sort of takes you through a wormhole to different parts of the galaxy, surely that's got to be there in somebody's mind.
It's 100%. Because that's my first thing when I saw this.
Right.
Is I was like, that's why immediately I'm like, we're calling this episode Stargate AG-I.
You're on.
So and quickly, right? You do a quick Google search, and of course you get the headlines of the project, and then right next to it you get the Wikipedia, and you get the IMDb, and like this is the description of the TV series from 1997 that came on the heels of the film. I think it was 94 or something. And this is the description of the Stargate, the TV series, Stargate SG-1.
Right.
A team of explorers made of soldiers and scientists travel through a Stargate, an ancient portal to other planets. They use the Stargate to explore new worlds, forge ties with friendly civilizations, and protect Earth from hostile forces. It's incredible. And I'm like, so I'm reading this. I'm like, so is this just someone is like, because as in the press release, one of the pieces that was talked about is like, this is in a way of asserting the U.S. that it stays here, that we're building this massive infrastructure because we need to protect our own interests right away I'm like,
it's a portal to the future for the U.S.
Portal to the future and defending against those, whoever those are. I don't really know. It's insane. And I realized we didn't even introduce ourselves. This is how 2025 is going. It's like, we're so excited. There's so much happening. I should take a moment and just say who I am.
Yes.
My name is Sean Leahy, and I'm with
Andrew Maynard.
And that makes this Modem Futura, the show that explores the intersection of technology, society, and the possible, probable, and preferable futures. Asking deep questions like, what will it mean to be human in the future with a project like Stargate AG-1?
So I love these double cold opening.
Oh my God. At some point, we do need to do an episode that's literally nothing but just a series of different cold opens. Right. And I don't know, maybe that'll be fun. It'll be a little popcorn episode or something. After, hopefully, when we get a little bit of a reprieve, a little slowdown from some of the crazy news, that's gonna be perfect time, because I think everyone at some point needs a little bit of a break.
Yes, yeah. But in the meantime, so it wasn't just Stargate. So in this week, you had the sort of put the rockets on AI. So we are now planning to go as a country, as an economy, super fast with AI with this new Stargate project. But at the same time, the brakes were taken off with President Trump taking away the Safe AI executive order that Biden put in place that tried to make sure that there were checks and balances around artificial intelligence to ensure that it is both developed responsibly and safely and securely, so that we see the benefits rather than have to suffer the risks. So now, taking the brakes off, putting the rockets on, where does that take us? Yeah,
it's pretty crazy. And I think, perhaps, and again, not to get into the political weeds of this, but, when a new president comes in, there's often like, yes, my executive orders are doing something different than because they have different views, different plans, whatever. But I think that was one of the most hidden pieces of this news cycle, because literally that was the piece, right? That this executive order, I think it was, I wrote it down, so I hope my note's correct. It's 14110, which was the executive order on safe, secure, and trustworthy development and use of artificial intelligence.
Yes.
And it's worth, I've got it written here, so I'll kind of just go over for people who either don't know or weren't familiar with what this was. But back when it came out, it made pretty big headlines as well. But it was initiated on October 30th of 2023, so just a little over a year ago. And basically some of the key objectives were around safe and security standards, right? So making sure that there are, that basically individuals or, companies, who are developing these things have opportunities to notify people like, hey, there's these new training phases and share results of safety tests.
Yep.
So this idea of having red teams also assessment. And then this was, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, so NIST was involved of this element, right? A long established federal agency that is used to handling these types of like risks and assessments and how standardize these components. Yep. Civil right protection, right? An aim to prevent harm from AI, from exacerbating or discriminating consumer privacy, right? So controls on data privacy, all these kind of elements. Governmental use of AI itself was in there too, right? So specifically calling for federal agencies to develop strategies for the responsible deployment. That's the key word, the responsible deployment of AI, especially when we're talking about delivering public services, aiming to enhance efficiency while maintaining public trust. That's a loaded, as I'm saying that, I'm like, that's a loaded sentence. But so then, of course, here we go. I think the repeal of that was like literally after the inauguration happened, rescinded that order right away, and then the next day comes this infrastructure, infrastructure piece.
Yep.
So
the message to me is very, very clear. Go as fast as possible. Do not worry about the consequences, because the goal is way more important than any collateral damage on the way or any unintended consequences that come out of trying to attain that goal.
Yeah, I think that's a huge. I think that's a very clear message.
Right. Yeah.
I think it was. It's a little murky, obviously, as these things go, and I don't know. I have some notes written here. Is it worth so I quickly was looking at like, okay, same thing. I was trying to dig up everything I could about this Stargate. There's not a lot of information.
Right.
If you heard or saw a news briefing of it, you've probably got as much information as anybody.
Yes.
But do you think it's worth kind of stepping through it a little bit?
I think it is, yes.
Okay, because as you mentioned, I think that's the conversation that comes right after this is, so if we do this, what happens?
Right.
Like how does this play out?
Right. Yep.
So as we mentioned, so the Stargate AI infrastructure project, which is also a company.
Yes.
Which is confusing.
Yes. And
not
so
clear.
Actually, but this folds into the fact that this is private investments. So these companies that are partnering have established this company that is going to be sort of managing the overall project initiative. So they're putting money in. Government is going to help with this. We're not quite sure whether that means money or whether it just means sort of opening up possibilities.
Yeah. Yeah. And so originally, right, the main companies that were there, I think I mentioned in the cold open, right? So you have OpenAI.
Yep.
Obviously, that's no surprise there. SoftBank, which is interesting. So they're, massive funder of lots of different things.
Yep.
Oracle. And then a company that wasn't named, MGX. Which I had to dig to find out what MGX is. It's relatively new, but it's basically an equity funder out of the UAE, the United Arab Emirates.
Okay, yes.
So a huge pot of money that fund, and they're specifically I think set up to try to fund goals that have to do with like artificial intelligence and things of that nature.
Yes,
so, but yeah, and OpenAI's website has a statement, I'll call it that, about Stargate, and it's kind of clumsy when you read it, and it was written both by OpenAI,
clearly not written by ChatGPT.
Yeah, and it was written by I think they sign it with OpenAI and SoftBank, but when you read it, you're like, this doesn't make much sense,
right?
And I think they had indicated in there that Masayoshi Son from SoftBank is going to be the head of this new venture or something.
Yes,
mostly because I think they're the ones putting up the money,
right?
So $500 billion with a B.
Yes.
Over 4 years. So That's with $100 billion sort of upfront.
Right. And that's going to build infrastructure, so sort of data centers, massive sort of AI compute capabilities.
Yep. And which some of apparently are already underway in Texas.
Yes.
And then they list, of course, the technology partners that they weren't part of the original sort of like, we're forming the company, but then it's the players you might expect. Well, so ARM, which is one, so chip design holder ARM. Microsoft, of course, which if OpenAI is involved, you would assume Microsoft is as well.
Right.
And then of course, and then NVIDIA as well.
Yes,
as some
with
of
the processors. Yes.
So you have these tech partners, each sort of position to bring in their expertise, but also cash is the expectation.
And actually, there's something really important here. So you have these companies really pledging to put a lot of money into this effort. There's got to be a return on that. This is a for-profit investment.
Yeah.
So it's worthwhile thinking about what these companies get out of it, what they're hoping to achieve.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think they're expecting, it's hard to say. I think the output, of course, is they're going to expect a return on whatever products and services that basically come out of this thing.
That's it. Yes.
Also, I think there's probably a lot of goodwill to be gained in an era where there's been increasing talk of regulation and things like that. If you're like, hey, U.S. government, we'll take care of this. Don't worry. We're your pal. Don't regulate us. There's no reason to clamp down safeguards and financial penalties.
Certain degree of regulatory freedom comes with this.
I would expect.
And of course, you would imagine that has spin-off effects on these companies outside of Stargate.
Absolutely. The industry, the industry sort of writ large.
So then this becomes a catalyst for the whole US AI industry to build things fast, to push boundaries, and to make money from that.
Yeah, make money and make big money.
Yes.
Global money. And I mean, and as we mentioned, right, like this is also in part a infrastructure specifically. So, and I was thinking about this part. So right off the bat, they're already working on a 1 million square foot data center or cluster of them in Texas.
Yep.
Which out here in Arizona, we have, there's a lot of data centers coming up in stuff out here. And I'm always like, are dry desert areas the best place to build those? I'm not sure, but
especially seeing that you need water to cool them.
And I'm like, at this point, maybe who cares about that stuff at this point? When you've got 500 billion attached to it.
Yeah.
But I was thinking about this infrastructure, and because right off the bat, I think anyone who's been working in the space of AI for a while, if you don't identify with somebody who is just like, let's just make whatever we can make, I don't care what the consequences are, just do it. If you don't align with that, you've been aware and concerned about what are the potential risks for all this.
Right.
But I was thinking about this too, just from a historical perspective. You have like the hype cycle with like the railway, right? So this big boom, a lot of those are original companies that built the rail system across the United States, for example.
Yep.
They didn't survive the hype cycle of that, but they built the infrastructure.
That's it. Yes.
Same with I think back to, the telecommunications and .com sort of hype and boom and bust. Lots of course, huge hype, famously, right? A lot of the big bust there. But as a result, we had like, I don't even know how many thousands or millions of miles of dark fiber laid. We got the infrastructure for high-speed data connectivity.
Yep.
And so a part of me is also looking at this with that nugget of, future historian.
What comes next?
Right. Is like, well, even if these, OpenAI may come and go, Microsoft, I mean, who knows these companies, right?
Yes. Yep.
But also I'm like, well, maybe even at the end of the day, if we go through some potential rough patches, which we can talk about, the infrastructure might be very valuable in the long run.
Yes. And just on that point, so it's easy, certainly from my perspective, to be critical about this. I mean, I study the unintended consequences of technology in society, and this rings huge alarm bells.
Yeah.
And yet, I think you do also have to acknowledge that this degree of investment opens up possibilities. It is definitely not a bad thing, but it's how it it's actually implemented, how it unfolds, that raises those questions. But yes, you can see a future where that level of investment in AI infrastructure opens up future possibilities that could be transformative for society.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, absolutely. And I think, and again, I mean, if we reduce this to its sort of simplest argument, right? You basically have now the removal of a caution,
right?
Of let's be recognizing this technology is transformative and also has potentials to which we understand we don't know yet.
Right.
So let's be careful.
Yes. Yep.
You also have the other side of that, which is we don't need that. It'll shake itself out. Right. Yes. Don't worry. It'll be fine. And this is, of course, where you'll hear oftentimes, I've said it myself, you'll hear the snarky comment of like, what could possibly go wrong?
Right.
With this. But, and I don't think this is a major surprise to anybody seeing, if we just back up these announcements, even just again, at the end of December, January, we know how to do AGI. We want super intelligence. Yep. There's this clamoring for take off the harness, take off the boundary,
the shackles. Let's go faster.
Let us go. Yes. We're going to raise gazillions and gazillions of dollars here.
Right.
And we're going to go. But as you mentioned, neither of those approaches are perfect. Right. So if we are restrictive, potentially we delay benefits. We also potentially are able to foresee and mitigate unintended consequences that we know to be bad.
Right.
But on the reverse of that, you're like, okay, so positive possibilities here. We remove the safeguards. We let our I'll use this term sort of broadly in terms of AI development. We let our best and brightest just go at it.
Right. Yes.
Right.
Yep.
We can hopefully see like accelerated advancements that could lead to groundbreaking innovations in things like healthcare, energy, global problem solving, things like that. Now, I will say, did you watch the press conference?
I did, yes. Yeah, with our focus on curing cancer.
Yeah, which was such a cringe. I mean, these are not...
But it's the go-to of so many technologies. We are going to cure cancer. We're going to eliminate cancer.
And I love, it was one of these things too where, I think originally when at some point, the President Trump is standing off to the side and he's sort of like, no, tell him more about how it's going to cure all this stuff.
Right.
And so then you can see, so Stan Altman's up there who, he's somewhat awkward. And, you can see, and I could almost see in his eyes where he's like, I need to say something, but I have to be really careful what I say. And so it's just like, we expect to, do those things and all good would happen.
Right. Yeah.
That's what we're going to work. And I'm like, oh my God.
Hedging enormougly.
Yeah.
So I would say there's tremendous possibility here. And if you unpick what they were saying, one of the things that they were focusing on was customizable mRNA vaccines.
Yep.
So basically you look at somebody's sort of personal sort of biology, and you look at where there are sort of cancers forming, and then within a matter
you get those little markers, right? Little
that's
DNA
right.
markers,
and the idea that you have an AI that is so powerful that within 24, 48 hours, it can construct a highly personalized mRNA vaccine. And these are vaccines that actually get your cells, there's mechanisms in your cells to create the proteins, whatever, that are going to sort of counter those vaccines. You could do that. Now, whether we can actually do that, I don't know, but I think it's a distinct possibility. So there is some reality there. But of course, just sort of saying we're going to cure cancer, especially when we really still don't fully understand cancer.
Yeah. Well, and I saw that. And one, again, all these things, I'm triggered on both sides of the coin at the same time. One is exactly this. I mean, I think the promise and the future, which we can get through with traditional means aided by technology like AI, certainly, towards individualized medicine of the full stack, whether that's just like, you've got a bad case of, some viral infection to cancers or what have you, or genetic diseases or things like that. Individualized medicine, I think, is huge. Because right now, I mean, medicine, people don't know. I mean, medicine is just, take this chemical and we hope the same thing happens to you.
You apply to the mean. Yes.
Exactly.
If you're average, you're fine.
Yeah. It's like, well, it's going to take out the bad thing and some good things too, but whatever. Yeah. So individualized medicine, I think, would be transformational for sort of the quality of life. Again, let's take the utopian expectation here that if this is available, it would be available to everyone, although the realities of such are.
Yes.
But the other side of this is, as he's up there talking about the development of an mRNA vaccine that will cure cancer, the irony was not lost on me that this was also coming from an administration previously that downplayed the value of a vaccine in the first place.
I know.
So there's a little bit of mixed signals here. But
Yes. So on one hand, sort of vaccines are bad. On the other hand, we're going to spend, although the country is going to spend $500 billion to create new vaccines.
Yeah. So it's a little mixed messaging for me, but I guess that's.
Yes.
Hopefully, the sign of a change of heart, leading with science.
But the bottom line is, yes, there's a lot of hype here, a lot of silly stuff being said, but you can see the potential.
Yep.
And a lot of this is speculative, but you can certainly imagine a future where incredibly powerful AI allows us to do things and achieve things that would be impossible otherwise.
Yeah.
But of course, the old adage always kicks in. If you've got that much power at your fingertips, what are the consequences of getting things wrong? And what does responsibility mean as you flex that power? And at the moment, the message is, we can worry about responsibility later. Let's just build it.
Or better yet, we'll build an AI to handle the outcome.
But then I can't wrap my head around this. You go back just a few months and the conversations around the existential risks of AI, everything from AI is going to kill us to there are going to be unintended consequences that really disrupt society. What are we going to do about it? Nobody seems to be talking about that now. What has happened?
I think if you want my cynical answer, it was that a price tag of $500 billion was attached to it, which apparently
that is the price of responsibility.
There we have it, right? You add enough money and maybe people change their tune.
Right.
Well, it was also interesting. So I think it was our last episode too. We had mentioned one of the ironies of OpenAI originally, again, going back to the original founding of this, was to ensure a transparent development of AI systems, et cetera.
It was a focus on societal good.
That's right. And what was interesting too is then, again, not to get into the nonsense of things, but then interestingly, not up at that sort of like the tech friend bubble there, it was Elon Musk was not there with his he has an AI.
Notable by his absence.
Yes. And then of course there's some nonsense in social media of him saying, well, they don't have the money. And then somebody saying, yes, we do. But it was interesting but none of that sort of back and forth was around the fear of this existential crisis, which was the original driver of these kind of technologies in the first place.
Yes.
And that absence was interesting again for me as well, where I'm like, well, wait, you're just talking again. They were just arguing about whether they do or do not have
the money. Yes. Not whether this is a dangerous idea or a good idea.
There was no comment of whether we should or shouldn't be doing this, people. Yes. It was, well, you just don't have the money to do it. Right. Because then, and again, one of these I come back to, I've got some notes here from the piece here, because this is also how it's being positioned. And job creation, right? Oh, it's going to create 100,000 jobs or more or something to that effect.
Yep.
And I'm curious when, again, the irony of saying those words while yesterday saying we ourselves are surprised at how AI is already replacing everyone and will join the work. I mean, that was the claim, was that in 2025, AGI is expected to join the workforce.
Right. Yes.
And
displacing people.
Yeah. Yep. And so I'm like, so are you only talking about like 100,000 construction?
Yeah.
Like what, when you say it's going to create 100,000 jobs to run.
How does this work?
What are you talking about?
Yes.
Yeah. And again, just being.
This is going to be the equivalent to the people building the railroads. Those are going to be the jobs.
Yeah. Build the railroad. And as soon as it's done, like we didn't say those 100,000 jobs will last.
Right. Yes.
Right. This is a 5-year project or whatever it is, 4-year project.
So this to me is all part and parcel of why we need conversations about how to do this the right way. And it could be a win-win. This is the thing that's frustrating me more than anything. Yeah. Yes, we can have the audacious goals. We can have those massive investments to build something that we think is going to be transformative. It's going to be fiscally transformative as well as socially transformative. But at the same time, if you do that without thinking about the consequences, it's a stupid bet
Yeah.
because the chances of things going wrong and seriously harming society get higher and higher the more powerful the technology. So why not do a win-win? Why not have that investment, but then invest in people that are really smart about understanding and thinking about how to do this in ways where you reduce the potential risks and you increase the chances of it truly benefiting society?
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. I think and maybe the optimist in me will say maybe cooler heads will prevail as this thing. Because again, there's not much information about.
I know, yes,
right? There's not much detail here,
and it could all change next week.
It could all change at this rate. By the time we turn this recording off, it might already be different.
Right.
But there's the hope that I would have is that there will come in. Whether it be government mandated is the different. I mean, I think clearly we've seen that the removal of sort of the repeal of that executive order is kind of that hint that we're not going to do it.
Yep.
Maybe you should do it.
Yep.
So the hope would be is that, some cooler heads will prevail and recognize that this is also an opportunity to learn early how to handle and to navigate these technologies to ensure human flourishing. I mean, that's the goal. That should be the goal. That's the goal. And again, you look at the sort of big tech company, mixed in there is oftentimes a very sort of long-termism mentality, things like that, where they must hopefully be thinking. Now, of course, there's always that danger of we'll sacrifice the well-being and stuff today for some
see that's it,
some outcome, 100 years from now.
And this is my concern. So you look at companies like OpenAI and Meta, and to a degree, other companies. There's been a sense of responsibility there. So I'll use OpenAI as an example. They have invested an awful lot into ensuring the safety of their systems, of stress testing them, of red teaming them to make sure there aren't any nasty surprises when they put them out into the wild. So they've understood that this is important. And yet at the same time, you're now having a rhetoric that comes out that says, actually, maybe that isn't so important. And we saw this with Meta. Meta went from investing heavily in trying to make sure that their products weren't having a serious adverse social impacts to pulling back from that and saying it's more important that we make money by making these products bigger rather than worrying about how it's impacting people's lives.
Yeah. I mean, and I think that's time will tell, obviously, but it is worrying because it is, it's especially in that situation that feels more nefarious because those aren't unknown. Yeah. Those aren't unknown consequences. Those are well-known.
We know. I just take social media. We know it impacts people's lives. Yeah. You look at these AI personas that are being developed. We know they seriously impact people's mental health and their lives. There need to be checks and balances somewhere.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, once we last talked about those synthetic personalities, I made one.
Right.
I made one through Instagram. And what's crazy is you look at the other ones that are out there, and these things already have, they're relatively new, and they already have like 600 some thousand messages, 1 million messages. And I'm like, so people are using them. But, and a company like Meta, for example, too, has been caught red-handed and reprimanded many times for intentionally manipulating their users, right?
Yes. Yep.
So in this situation too, you're like, these are not unknown consequences. These are very known consequences that they take a deliberate stance on of saying it's not worth the headache. Even if they say financially, it's just not worth it.
So then in that context, this is actually something that keeps me awake at night because I teach my students and I argue very strongly that in the long run, society will not see the benefit of these technologies if we ignore these possible consequences, especially when you've got incredibly complex technologies where we don't fully understand how they integrate with society. And I've argued that if you're a for-profit, if you're a business, you need to pay attention to this because at some point you will lose you'll get called out, you'll lose your market if you don't think about it. Yeah. But the thing that keeps me awake at night is, what if I'm wrong? What if you can have a company that decides that they don't care about their customers, they just care about profit, and they succeed? And it concerns me a lot that that's the case. There will still be damage. There will be very severe damage with a situation like that. But maybe the leaders of the companies don't care if they're still making money. And actually, we've seen this with Meta and with Facebook, that no matter what's gone wrong, the company has still thrived. And that, to me, begs the question, where does this responsibility come in? If money means everything and success financially means everything, how do we build social responsibility into the system? Because if we don't, a lot of people are going to suffer.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I mean, the alarm bell that's triggering in my head is like, I need a big button I can push to evoke Cory Doctorow's the enshitification.
Right. Yes,
I mean, that's exactly.
That's what it feels like.
And that's exactly what it is. And for people, I mean, I'll put a link in there. It's a great, it started as an essay, but it's a wonderful, and it was just picked as like several different places have picked it. I think this year and last year was like the word of the year.
Right.
And essentially, I mean, I'll just reduce it here as quickly as I can. Enshitification is basically when a company begins, and their social media platforms are great examples. Amazon is a great example, where it starts off, it's all about the customer.
Right.
We'll build a platform, we'll build an interaction, we'll make it so warm and cozy and amazing. And then slowly we change from, it's no longer about the customer. Now it's about making business relationships.
Right.
So we do that. So we kind of harm the user in favor of business, to the point at which we get so large that we just now turn the screws on them as well.
Right.
Basically, for that exact reason, it's raking in profit over everything else. So intentionally, and not intentionally like, I want to make a bad product, but intentionally.
But it just goes that way. Yes. It's like a force just pulling these very large corporations.
And so over time, so you're left with, a horrible, if we just pick on social media, for example, you're left with a very gross, horrible, sort of less than experience. But you're sort of locked and trapped. Right. Where do you go?
Right.
Why are you still, I think Cory, he's talked quite a bit on different podcasts about this as well. He's stuck on, Twitter/X, and people say, well, why are you still there? And he's like, because my entire community is there.
Right.
And I can't go. I'm stuck. I'm locked in.
Yes.
And so that's part of this push is like, but again, if the companies are not held to a standard, or, again, use the either little or big R, depending on, what kind of regulation we're talking. If they're not compelled to make it, for example, as easy for you to pick up your social media provider and move it over to, whatever the new service would be, you're sort of locked in and you're stuck.
So now you come back to this idea of government's involvement in this. And actually, this is what we see more in Europe. This idea that government is there to apply the brakes when necessary and to sort of provide the steer and open opportunities for more responsible use where necessary, because if they're left to it, even with the best will in the world, for-profits will not get there. And now we're entering an era that says less government, less regulation is good. Let's leave it to the industry because they're going to do the right thing. And yet, if there is this irresistible pull to the enshitification of the future, how are we going to prevent that from happening?
I don't know, and I hadn't thought about that till now. I hadn't connected this like the Stargate with enshitification. So that's been wonderful. But now I'm really concerned.
Yes,
I'm really concerned all of a sudden because. That presents an interesting challenge, because you can see, again, if we think about a scenario, right? You can see a scenario where you essentially become, and maybe not personally, but you personally become reliant on some AI system that maybe it's the government using it. Maybe it's something like taxes or so. I don't know. Find something that you take services of the U.S. government, post office, taxes, the DMV, whatever, that they are controlled by these devices, and you become the enshitification is now not just your social media, but this is
embedded into the system.
This is embedded into your society, your governmental interactions.
Yes,
is now locked into one of these enshitification cycles where,
and to be clear,
you have no choice.
If this happens, it's not because of bad intent to start with. It's just how these things go. If you don't put the right checks and balances in place.
That's it. Yeah. I mean, I think, you can run down these risks, but again, it's the same thing. I mean, and even now, right, we know with AI development, there's been lots of research that's been there, but then also ever since the sort of, just turn a phrase here, the Cambrian explosion of generative AI tools.
Right.
But again, I mean, all the look at what, the baked in biases, the ethical considerations of what that means when these systems are using those different kinds of biases baked into them, and what does that mean, and how does it reinforce, sort of these systemic inequalities, all these, does it amplify all these issues? And so we have this as a present risk with no real solution.
How do we fix this? Foresight catalyst Sean Leahy. How do we fix it?
Oh my goodness! First of all, we slow down, right? We reenact us. We need that letter. I mean, again, let's grab there's a petition to all the tech industry who was not on that panel.
Yes,
write another letter saying we need to slow down.
Right. They're all probably there thinking, how can we benefit from this? Okay, we may not be on the podium, but surely there are benefits to
everyone's
flow out
lining
of
up
this.
to contribute, right?
So there are actually, I think, a few things here. And one of the things, because this is what I do as an academic, I think about sort of how do we develop the knowledge necessary to actually do the right things. I actually think there's a very real need for new ways of thinking and understanding how we actually sort of get through this transition. But then the challenge is who's going to fund that and who's actually going to do it? Because we know that even if you have funding, it's very easy for people to misuse that and not address the question.
Issue.
But here's a possibility, and it's not mine. This has been raised with other technologies. What if out of, take that $500 billion, we spend 1% of that on trying to understand how to do this in a way that fully supports human flourishing?
Yeah.
That's still a lot of money. That's $5 billion.
Make your checks payable to the care of Modem Futura
and the Future of Being Human initiative. Yeah. We'll take a small slice of that, but I think it's a serious way of thinking about this. I mean, the challenge is thinking what sort of initiatives would you invest in to make sure that you get clear and actionable information rather than stuff which is useless. But I do think it's worthwhile these companies thinking about how do you take a slice of that, and actually it's effectively sort of risk management or risk mitigation. Pay people to help them understand how to do this in a way which is not going to harm them in the long term, not going to harm society in the long term, and make sure that they don't have that backlash from society that is going to prevent them from doing what they're trying to do because they've done it in a really bad way.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I think that would be amazing.
Right.
The concern, the cynic in me, I'm switching. I'm going back and forth all over the place. But the cynic in me too wonders, like, okay, you have something again that is this big in terms of the capital. Yeah, sure, 1% on that. Like, my concern would be window dressing. That it would be we're going to spend this on whatever we're going to call it, responsible development. Whatever.
It's a classic ploy. You actually you invest in something that is not going to impact your business model in any way whatsoever. So it looks good, but it actually takes resources away from things that could truly be impactful.
Yeah, and then of course you have they're there. But it's like, you go ahead and do your little research and you tell us, but like, do you really think that you, the 1% out of this, are going to impact this machine that we've created to move forward? So that would be a concern, because if there isn't any teeth or regulation, and again, this is where I think it gets sort of troubling that there isn't a governmental way of being like,
see, this is the more independent way of doing it. You have government funding that maybe not to the tune of $1 billion, but with government funding, you end up having more independence, more transparency, potentially more teeth if it folds into policy, and less of a vested interest.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, to put it really sort of crudely, right? A government has the ability to put someone behind bars. Right? By
at least I used to think that.
I know. Well, geez. Let's
not even go there.
I'm going to put the lid right back on that and set that over the side. But that raises this sort of challenge is, what would stop a corporation? And again, I think we mentioned this before. I mean, OpenAI, the other side of OpenAI and their WorldCoin and all this kind of stuff, right, is that there is not a shortage, I think, of some of these large companies envisioning world domination from a corporate perspective. And if you watch Black Mirror, you watch any sci-fi, there's plenty of examples of sort of that sort of dystopian future.
Black Mirror is looking quite quaint these days, by the way.
You know, I do want to say at some point someone will look back and be like, oh, it's just a historical, right? This is based on actual events, you know?
Yes.
Someone will have to just edit it and just put out that little tag based on actual events.
Right.
No, it is quite wild, but I do worry about that you have this breeding ground for corporations to become essentially powerful enough to rival that of a nation state.
Of course, yes.
We're even seeing this at some micro levels with things like, his name keeps coming up and everything, but like think something like Starlink, right? It is a private company that's also serving the infrastructure needs of countries at war. At conflict,
right? So
now you have
this merging,
and where you're putting the and even the U.S. contracts a lot of stuff to like SpaceX is another example of a private company doing space, doing many of the things that NASA had done previously in terms of rocket and space flight, but now you're putting that power in the hands of a company, rolling up potentially to a single individual who can decide, I'm going to put my thumb on the scale here and change the output to what serves my interests as a single person, as opposed to an elected leader, the will of an entire nation, what have you. That's concerning. And so again, not to say that Stargate AG-I that's not the goal, but you can connect the dots that you can
shift of power.
You can see how quickly it could go that way.
That's right.
Without the right sort of checks and balances that are put on these things.
And actually, just take that a step further. So you have this private initiative that is building this AI infrastructure. They are eventually going to be offering services that are unrivaled in terms of artificial intelligence.
Sure.
They're going to be offering those services to the government, not only for the purpose of governance, but for the purpose of the military as well. So national protection.
Sure, of course.
So effectively, this consortium are going to have a monopoly on how the country runs. So we may have an elected government, but you can imagine a very dystopic future where that government can't operate without the permission of this corporation.
Company. Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's that science fiction nightmare of some of these tales where it's like, that's a dark place.
That's where we need people working out how to prevent that happening now.
Yeah, well, I think that's a big piece of that whole of all of it.
Yes,
but also a big piece of that's what we do. Is that we think about these things in the future and start asking, well, what actions need to start happening and conversations need to start happening today.
Right. That's it. And I should say, and I keep saying we need somebody to do this. Yeah. There are people.
Yes.
So yes, it's obviously what we do here at Arizona State University. You and me and others here.
Yep.
It's what initiatives such as HAI at Stanford do. And there are these initiatives all around the world. In fact, I was just reminding myself, if you go over to Europe and the UK, you've got Responsible AI UK, which is an initiative set up specifically to ask these questions. So people are doing this. You have expertise. But my sense is that it's too distributed, too fractured, and too underfunded to actually give us the level of insights and understanding and direction that we desperately need here.
Yeah, and that's exactly it, because I think the piece is there's lots of individual people doing this. And if you round everyone up into a group, it's a big group.
It is.
But it's dispersed.
Yeah.
But I think this is also, and I hope this becomes, that's what we do with the podcast.
Right.
We're trying to get this information out, get people to think about these things too, because I think at some level, this comes back also to a societal question, right? Granted, societies, if you're a historian or a fan of history, you can watch these things ebb and flow over time, and pendulums swing both ways and all this kind of stuff. But right now, what does that mean from a societal priority?
That's right. Yes.
If we are saying develop at all costs, right? how do we, and again, I say we as like the collective we,
right? Yes.
How do we sit between this trade-off between safety and the speed of development, or even you could say the inevitable, one way or another, we'll discover it. Is it going to be cautiously or by accident?
Yeah. But then what is the responsibility of ordinary people? What is the responsibility of the people listening to this podcast? Do you just say, well, that's somebody else's problem? Or do you say, I can't do anything about this, I'm just going to let it play out? Or are there other things that people could be doing? And I suspect that even realizing that this is a train that is running out of control in a certain direction should be enough to get a lot of people thinking this probably isn't a great idea, and then asking, well, what can I do to be part of changing the direction of that?
Yeah, I think it's a beautiful sort of call to action.
Right.
Because I think that's what's in, I mean, this is one, and there's many other things you could tack on, right?
I know.
But I think that is a piece, is to become an engaged, engaged civically with, because it's not, again, the issue here is much more long-term than this first 4 years.
That's right.
Right?
Yes,
like, okay, cool. They'll get this stuff in. And I say that with, there could be the potential here for, again, even if you take them at their word, and let's assume that the innovation of it goes in a linear fashion without major hiccups, that in some timeline, we're able to create these individual cancer-killing mRNA vaccines, right? Wonderful.
Yep.
But without government regulation, how do we know that would be available to the American people or anyone?
Right. Or how do we know that they're safe?
How do you know they're safe? How do you know they've tested?
You're defunding research into the safety of new drugs and the responsible development of new drugs and the testing of them, how do you know that those on-demand vaccines are going to be safe for you individually?
Yeah, it's true. How do you know? And then again,
you use AI.
We use your synthetic you. We'll create a synthetic Andrew.
Everybody's going to have a digital twin. We're going to test it on the digital twin first.
I heard somebody talking about this the other day too, that they were like, oh, well, don't worry. We'll have a simulated version of everything. We'll have, digital copies. And I'm like.
This is where we bring Risberg back in because now we're getting into sort of simulation hypothesis. If we've got a simulated version of everybody.
Then you're like, instantly, I'm brought back to that thought experiment of like the red hat. Right? If there's 100 simulated, 99 simulated things and one real thing, right? And you reach in and grab, what statistically more likely are you going to have?
Yeah.
You'll be the simulated one.
Yep.
Yeah. It's like, what was the test like from Blade Runner? Like, how do you tell if you're the replicant? I need that little, whatever that little eyeball.
I forget what they call it. The void whatever test.
Forgot it. But I need and that's that realization.
This is how it begins.
I know. It's absolutely insane.
With Stargate.
Stargate AG-I. I like it.
At least they didn't call it Skynet.
Could you imagine? Oh my goodness.
Yeah. But there's also another aspect of this that I want to bring in that I don't know how many people will be aware of, and that is the energy side of it. And actually,
we haven't even talked about that.
No, in the press release that this was mentioned. If you're building these mega data centers and this mega AI infrastructure, you're going to need power, a lot of power, a lot more power than is currently available.
Put up some more nuclear plants.
And so this is exactly it. And the strategy here, this was hinted at in the press conference, but actually it's been talked about and written about elsewhere. It means new nuclear power stations and some of these sort of small modular stations that are under development at the moment. It means increased use of fossil fuel.
Yeah.
So this is part of the strategy. You mine oil and coal and anything else you can burn far faster than you're doing at the moment, and you create these new power stations to feed the hunger of these emerging massive mega AI systems.
Yep.
And that, there's an argument there that says in order to get to that point where we can truly transition to renewable energies, we need to burn everything we've got now to develop the intelligence and understanding. I don't buy into it, but it's an argument.
It is.
But I think people within this country and other countries ought to be part of that conversation, because we are also. It's a huge gamble.
A huge gamble.
And
that's. I mean, I'm glad you brought that up, because So you can, again, right in this, another pen stroke of on that same day was removing the U.S. from the Paris Climate Accord, right?
Yes.
So you can see the groundwork is like, well, because to do this thing, we're going to need as much power as possible.
That's right,
How do you get as much power? Again, as you mentioned, fossil fuels right now, potentially more nuclear power. Again, where's that going to come from? The other piece to that, right, is if we're putting that, like, where is it going to go? Who wants that in their backyard? Right. So it's not usually the wealthy, affluent, beautiful neighborhoods that have a power plant.
Who deals with the pollution and the fallout that comes from it?
And what do you do? Because, I mean, again, no matter how well you contain it, no matter how much concrete you bury nuclear waste inside, it's there. And it's there for potentially tens, if not, millions of years of half-life.
That challenge, and we know how hard that is. But even if you're looking at sort of more conventional fossil fuel plants, you've got the pollution that comes from them. So
the follow-on health implications. You're going to need an AI.
This is the big gamble. The big gamble is bet everything we have now on the hope that we find solutions to the problems we cause on the way.
Yeah. And that's terrifying, to be honest, because, I mean, what you're doing, in a sense, is that you're exactly hitting it, is you're gambling the success of the future generations.
That's right. Or the lives of future generations. Yes.
And, and it's weird, too, because that gets you into some interesting areas, again, with like long-termism, but even just still the projections of the orders of magnitude of future humans to be born and live out their lives on the planet and so forth. It like seriously are gambling that with just, and then we're not going to play like the existential game here of wiping off humanity, but you're playing with quality of life, life expectancy, increase in all these other things on the hope that, we burn it today so that group will have the benefits of what we don't know that we can achieve yet.
So essentially, the calculus is we're asking, or sort of leadership here or industry are saying, are you as a society willing for the next 2 or 3 generations to have a decreased quality of life so that the generations after can have an increased quality? Are you willing to make that sacrifice? Of course, I'm putting this in very, very stark terms, and it may not turn out that way, but this is one of the considerations. What are you willing to, if you're listening to this, what are you willing to give up now with this investment so that future generations can have a better life?
Yeah. That's a huge question. And and instantly, what brought me back when you mentioned that is when we were talking about previously, we've talked about a couple of different episodes and we were talking about autonomous cars, right? And the fact that, Waymos and anybody else who's operating out on the public streets, there was this comment, I think it was me who made it or something, was like, well, I never signed up to be part of this agreement.
Right.
And I think it was Bruno on that episode who had mentioned, he's like, well, your city did. And it's a similar thing, right? Behalf, so when you're asking this question of like, what are you willing to gamble? It's who's actually making that. Who's betting on which, who's betting heads?
That's right, yes.
Or betting on black or whatever.
Of course, the argument is, this is an elected government, so we put our trust in them. And I should actually qualify because I'm being sort of a little bit hyperbolic here.
Sure.
That there is a possibility that this generation will see the benefits and it won't be such a strong trade-off. But there's always a chance that it will be.
Yeah.
And the more that we say, let's go fast and break things and forget about the consequences, the greater the chances are that this generation and maybe the next generation are going to be suffering those consequences.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like, I don't have this is me personally, I don't have this fear of this like existential thing, right? But it's the degradation of quality of life.
Right.
Yes. It's things like, we let this new AI system is now running this whatever. And you're like, I can't do anything I used to, like, what is going on?
But you're locked into the system.
But you're locked in, right? And then you're like, well, and then, so that's my concern, honestly, in terms of like things that I can foresee as being reasonably achieved in the near term is you end up with things like, and we've seen a lot of papers and people coming out with talking about when they are using these assistive technologies or looking at data and looking at, why are people being denied mortgages? Why are people getting different sentencing for criminal low level criminal activity? Things like that and again, if these systems, this will not be new to anyone who's listened to this podcast from the beginning, is me saying you believe the myth that this thing can do better than humans,
right?
Because it's just there, or the government is owning it or running it. And that's very dangerous, because then you get in this situation where like, well, you looked the wrong way and the system said, tough luck, you go here. And it's like, well, wait a minute.
And again, it's this idea that to you as the individual, everything looks fine if it's other people that are being impacted.
Sure.
As soon as it's you who's impacted, everything changes.
Different story.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so how do we turn this round? This has actually got to a pretty dark place.
I think we both knew when we sat down. We're like, this is a big,
right. But here's the positive thing. So if you go back to this idea that there could be huge wins here with AI if we do it right, I like the idea of ending on a sort of a question of optimism. Which is, okay, how do we increase the chances of human flourishing through this? What do we need to do that we're missing at the moment as individuals, as a society, to increasing the chances of good things happening and decreasing the chances of bad things happening? So we have a win-win. And I still think there is a window of opportunity to do something here.
Yeah. And I do too. And I think, I might even take it a step further and say, I think the opportunity here is for everyone to start getting engaged.
Right.
And I don't mean that in a professional way necessarily. I mean, that would be great, but also just thinking about it.
Yep.
So coming back, again, I come back to this idea, right, of having like radical creativity. Like if there aren't a constraint, we do this all the time with thought experiments, right? Like remove these constraints or put these constraints on you.
Imagine what happens. Yes.
Yeah. And I'm like, and to exactly that, what could we see from this? And how do we work within the structure that we do have, right? In this scenario, you have a lot of, a mix of private and publicly traded companies banding together to do this, right? Yep. They are reliant in some ways on their customers, on their businesses. Like they're not without reason. Even if the government doesn't do it,
right?
People can do it.
Right.
If people stop.
That's exactly it. Yes.
That there is this control. Again, that's where we have to deal with this enshitification issue. Right. But people have control.
So actually, does Corey talk about deshitification? Because it feels like that's what we need.
Yeah. Well, he does actually. And I think through even through like the Electronic Foundation is trying to propose alternatives to this.
Yes. It's potty training.
Exactly. Right. But it is, it's like, it really exploring what these things could be and pose these questions that, how does this future prioritize human flourishing and asking that and getting involved in what does that mean?
Yep.
That we, it's great. Like, yes, this is exciting stuff if we can start to see benefits to it that are human centric, that we can look at and go, as a society, yes, this feels right.
Right.
But always with a hand on the brake.
Yeah.
To say like, if things are not going well, and there's going to, who decides, right? These are all going to be, these are very squishy things because what we say today will be different in 10 years, which will be different in 50 years, which will be certainly different in 100 years, or it'll be cyclical and come back around, whatever. But that changes. But still having this ability as a society to recognize when things are changing and decide what to do about that.
Yeah.
And having a mechanism to do that. Getting involved.
I think that's exactly it. And I just to wrap up, I had this image of the trolley problem in my head as you were saying that. and listeners will know I don't like the trolley problem, but it's useful. But to me, and again, just to remind people very quickly, the trolley problem is you have this trolley that there's a bifurcation in the track. On one, there's one person on one side, and the other there's a whole group, and the person sort of
you can't stop it. You can't save anybody.
Stop the trolley. You can't save anybody. You've got to make a decision. The fundamental question there is, who removed the brake?
Who's the jerk who put this trolley on the track without a brake in the first place?
That, I think, is how we got to think about things.
The quality control when they said, no, we're just innovative. We just needed to go fast.
Right, that's right, yes.
See, that's a good one. I like that. We'll end with that because that's the question. Who took who broke the brakes?
Who broke the brakes? Who took the brake away?
Or didn't test them?
Right, or didn't think we needed one.
Yeah, there's no quality control. I think that's a great place.
Right.
That's a great place to end. And I'm sure, we'll be talking about this for the next 4 years as this starts to develop and we start to learn more. That's what I'm looking forward to as the next step, is learning a little bit more about what this actually, what are the aims, what are the goals, other than just we're pumping in a huge amount of money and don't worry, we're going to solve everything.
Yep.
So we'll see. But yeah, well, Andrew, thank you again. What a wonderful conversation. And this is one of the beautiful things is that we can just sit down, hit record, have these conversations.
I agree. Yes.
And I hope for all of our listeners, I'm hoping at the very least, we're stimulating a lot of conversations around the dinner table, the pub, the cafe, wherever you go. Hopefully you'll have, a couple other opinions to take with you.
Yep.
And I'll link as much stuff as I can, of course, in the show notes. And until next time, thanks for joining. Yeah. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you then.
Demodulating signal.
Modem Futura is a production of the Future of Being Human initiative at Arizona State University. Be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows. To learn more about the Future of Being Human initiative and all of our other projects, please visit us on the web at futureofbeinghuman.asu.edu.
End transmission.